Hello, everyone. I'm Alex Pasho from Crystal Touch Bell's Palsy Clinic in Rotterdam, the Netherlands. The topic of today's session is how to cope with the long-standing Bell's palsy. Today we'll discuss the, so to say, classical cases of facial paralysis, which includes Bell's palsy, Ramsay Hunt Syndrome, post-operational facial paralysis, in which cases the integrity of the facial nerve trunk has not been compromised. In this audience, there are some of you who have confronted facial paralysis more than a year or 5 years or 10 years or even 20 years ago. There are also some of you whose facial paralysis journey has just started. Maybe it happened a few days ago, a few weeks ago, or maybe a couple of months ago. And from the various resources, maybe even from your doctors, physicians, therapists, you may have heard that there is a chance that your facial palsy will not recover quickly, and that the effect of it will remain forever if it doesn't recover within a year. And you're wondering whether this is true, yes or no, or whether your fears and worries about the situation are substantiated. At Crystal Touch, we believe that the only way to regain confidence and hope is through knowledge and understanding of what had happened to you, and that you are not alone on this road. Bell's palsy is hard, very hard. For now, you do not have your smile, and nobody can understand how it feels unless they have been through it themselves. You do not need to pretend that you are okay just to make others feel more comfortable. You do not need to rely on your willpower alone to get through this situation. Our face helps us to express our emotions, to convey our message to the world. And half of our face, when it is affected, inevitably it will affect also our emotions and our emotional condition. So it is okay not to be okay in this situation. It is okay to take time off and seek emotional support. It can be a good idea to reach out to the community of other facial palsy sufferers who understand very well what you are going through. It might also be helpful to seek professional support if you do not know how to handle this, especially if you do not have sufficient emotional support from your family and your close friends. It does not matter what are your daily challenges. You need to take care of yourself first in this difficult time. Your best friend is knowledge and understanding. We are here to answer your questions and to help you in this difficult time. It is estimated that there are about 15 million people in the world who have not fully recovered after facial palsy. At our clinic, we may not have sufficient capacity to help each and every one of them who need clarity, support, and help to achieve recovery. What we can do is to share our knowledge and experience, provide you with understanding what happened to you, and that is not the end of your hopes for recovery. When you know and understand what it is and what you can expect, it reduces your fears and shows some light at the end of the tunnel. Let's establish what is a long-standing Bell's palsy. For the sake of simplicity, I will call all the peripheral facial paralysis types, like Ramsay Hunt, operations, tumors, and so on, as Bell's palsy. It's not entirely correct, but for the sake of simplicity, I will do that. If the damage to the facial nerve was only superficial, then the recovery should take place within maximum 2 to 3 weeks. So you will turn the page, forget it, and live on normally. Long-term facial paralysis happens when the damage to the facial nerve was more severe. Then the so-called degeneration of facial nerve fibers takes place, and the regeneration, which means regrowing back of the facial nerve fibers after the damaging factor has been removed, takes substantial amount of time. And as a result of that long process, complications may develop. Those complications include, but are not limited to, facial synkinesis, something which you have certainly read about, which is involuntary facial movements of the parts of the face which normally do not belong to the intended facial movement or facial expression. It could be tightness in the face. It could be pain in certain areas of the face, dry eye, or to the contrary, excessive lacrimation, and some other symptoms. You can find more details about those symptoms in our Bell's palsy knowledge base, which you can see on our website, or of course, please feel free to book a one-on-one consultation so we can discuss your particular situation directly via the video call. Complications that I mentioned are the result of a long recovery. To explain it in a relatively simple terms, the whole process goes like this. Stage number 1, facial nerve fibers sustain damage. It could be superficial damage or deeper damage, but in any case, the nerve stops being able to conduct signals coming from the brain towards the facial muscles. This is called a conduction block. We already discussed what happens when the damage was only superficial and damaging factor has been quickly removed. Then within 2 to 3 4 weeks, facial movements return in full and you forget the incident and live on. When this damage was more serious, then the recovery or regeneration of the damaged nerve fibers can take anything from 4 weeks to 3.5, in extreme situations, 4 months. And the very first signs of improvement, very first movements will appear only after that period. It is very different from case to case, and it's hard to predict exactly how long it may take before you can see the first signs of improvement. Once you begin seeing the first signs of improvement, first facial movements, then your facial paralysis is finished as such. Why? Because your face is not fully disconnected from the facial nerve anymore. So your muscles can receive signals and that stream of signals increase slowly by slowly as the time passes. So your muscles are able again to receive signals originating from your brain. You may think that if even after 10 years, 5 years, 30 years, 1 year, 2 years, your face still does not move as before, and if your facial movements are too small, too rough, or too disorganized, you still have a paralysis. This is not the case. You do not have a paralysis. The symptoms that you have are complications. Take a look at this picture. In this patient have had facial paralysis more than 30 years ago when she was less than 1 year old. It might look like on her affected side there is very little movement, so the assumption would be that it is still due to her facial paralysis. It is not the case. Lack of facial movements is not caused by the paralysis, but by the disrupted balance in the mimetic signals that the brain is sending to the affected side, to the facial muscles on the affected side of her face. That is why for all patients who come to Crystal Touch Clinic, we measure their facial nerve. We do nerve conduction study, extended protocol, and we do synkinetic correlation test. Nerve conduction study is meant to establish, to measure with the special equipment which we have in the clinic, the level of recovery of the facial nerve and to establish how well the connection between the brain and the facial muscles on the affected side has been restored compared to the healthy side. That's part number one. Part number 2 is synkinetic correlation test. This is the test which we have developed in our clinic, and it is meant to measure the difference in the structure of the signals that the brain is sending to the healthy side compared to the affected side. When we do this, we can clearly see on the screen of the computer that the brain is managing facial movements on the healthy and affected side in a different way. Here on the screen, you can see an example of synkinetic correlation test. Blue graph reflects the activity of the eye area. Green graph reflects the activity of the mouth area. Flat graph means that the muscles are relaxed. Some activity in the graph means that the muscles are actively contracting. You can see that on the affected side compared to the healthy side, the pattern of activity is different when the patient is smiling. You can see that when the patient is smiling on her healthy side, the area of the eye remains uninvolved and the muscle is nicely relaxed. And if you compare the activity of the mouth area on the healthy side compared to the affected side, you will see that the activity on the affected side is much higher, which is, by the way, another illustration of the fact that the muscles are not paralyzed, they are active. But the result of the less active contraction of the healthy side is much better than the higher levels of contraction on the affected side. Why? Because the balance in the activity of the muscles on the affected side is disrupted, and the muscles are actually confronting each other, and that is why they are not producing result as the nice and moderate activity on the healthy side can produce. And with the time, during the long recovery period, those activities, disrupted balance of those activities on the affected side, slowly becomes a new habit. I will not go in much detail about this topic. We have other videos and articles about that. I will just bring you into the picture a small analogy. Imagine that you have two shoes on, and one of these two shoes is 10 kilos heavy. You can still walk with that shoe on, right? But then the structural signals that your brain is sending to your body will be much different from when you have a normal shoe on. And if you do it during a long period of time, like a year or several months, or even not talking about many years, then inevitably your guide will change. And then after that time, even if you throw away the heavy shoe and put on the normal shoe, your guide will not immediately change back automatically. It will still remain because this guide has become your new habit, and the brain will keep moving your body in the same fashion as you used to do it when you were carrying the heavy shoe. So what does what we have discussed today mean for you? First, facial nerve does not remain injured forever. It recovers. It may take time, but it will recover. It may take 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, or 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, but it will recover. Second, if the recovery is long, then there is a very high probability for complications to form. And those complications are, as we discussed, habits that your brain develops during the long recovery process. Everybody knows that habits do not go by themselves just like that. And people who have been suffering from those for more than a year can tell you their first-hand experience. On the other hand, it does not mean that it is all hopeless. As any habits, these habits on the face can also be changed, but it will take certain efforts to achieve the changes. Since there are no physiological or any other limitations to changing your habit, this can be worked on and it can be improved. On the other hand, as we all know, habits are not easy to change. It will require consistent work, regularity, dedication, commitment, and of course, it may or will require some guidance and professional support. We have walked this path with hundreds of our patients, and we saw how they rise above their fears, their worries, how they learn to smile again from inside, despite all the obstacles on their way. There's no need to be scared. Bell's palsy complications can be worked on, and if you want to improve, you need to prepare to take an effort. As Confucius once said, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, and we are here to help. Thank you.